Hello, everybody. This session will be focused on the evaluation of information in writing classes. Even though the evaluation of information is significant not only in writing but also in speaking, the focus of this session will be more on writing classes. And I'll be checking this topic using the CRAAP test. As you know, that the evaluation of information is a highly momentous component of digital literacy, which is one of the 21st century skills that we need to integrate and emphasize in our English language classrooms. But the question is, how can we help our students to evaluate and check the information they access online or the use in their writing assignments? So here, there is one effective tool, which is the CRAAP test. And the CRAAP test is a set of questions that the student asks himself or herself to make sure or to check whether the piece of information he or she is using is good, reliable, or is incorrect, not based on evidence, and therefore not good for being used. So the CRAAP is an acronym for 5 criteria, which are currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. So if we start with currency, this criterion examines the timeliness of the piece of information, whether it's old or new and updated. Since we are in a fast-pacing world, everything is changing every now and then. We need to depend on and rely on updated information in order to avoid any inaccuracies or any mistakes. So let me bring you an example. If, for example, one of my students writing an essay on California fires, and in the middle, the student writes a statement, the Palisades fires haven't been contained yet. Even though the student tries to bring real information in the essay, the statement is still invalid and untrue, simply because, based on updated sources, the Palisades fires are completely contained. But what the student included in the essay conflicts with reality, rendering the whole statement untrue. So one rule here is that our students be aware of the idea that they need to bring updated information to their writing assignments. Moving on to the second criterion, which is relevance. This criterion focuses mainly on whether the piece of information is related to the topic and whether the student checks several sources or just relies heavily on one source. You know that the problem that we mostly suffer from is that our students bring information from here and there and cherry pick things and kind of patch information into a paragraph or essay. So in order to avoid this problem, students need to be aware of the significance of making a match between the piece of information and the topic. Okay, relating to the example of California fires, if your student brings a statement on the history of California that does not support the main topic, which is the outbreak of the fires, the statement is still invalid and irrelevant, even if it is grammatical, because it does not, focus on the main topic or it does not relate to the main topic. The third criterion is authority. And the set of questions under this criterion handle the author or the writer of the source. who is the writer? Is he or she an expert or a layman just voicing opinions? Because um, if the source is written or created by an expert, this means that the information is authorized and can be trusted. However, if the piece of information is included in a source that is created by a layman, not an expert voicing opinions, so most probably the piece of information is untrusted. And you've experienced students bringing information from Wikipedia and blogs and treating the information as facts, while in fact they are opinions or the pieces, I mean, the pieces of information are opinions. So the fourth criterion is accuracy. And as you can see, it relates heavily, or it relates to the idea of correctness, whether the piece of information is correct or incorrect. But the question is, how can the student know whether the information or the statement they access is correct or not? So the answer is look for the evidence. They have to check whether the piece of information is adequately supported by evidence, or it's just a piece of information that is thrown into a text and that's it. Over and above all of these things, they have to check whether the source includes any grammatical or typographical mistakes, because you know that authorized and valid sources rarely have any problems or mistakes with grammar and mechanics. So it's highly recommended that students check these sources for accuracy and make sure that the pieces of information they bring are adequately and sufficiently supported by evidence. So finally, the criterion of purpose covers the source itself. I mean the purpose here has to do with why the information exists after all, why the writer includes the piece of information, which is the purpose of the writer. And here we have to ask ourselves, or in this position, I mean the student, whether the writer intends to inform people of something, or to persuade people with something, or just to propagate certain ideological, cultural, racial, or religious, or any other orientations. So in that light, if this last purpose with the purpose of the author, this means that the author is biased and adopting it's biased and adopting a kind of extreme orientation. Therefore, the student has to dispose of this piece of information altogether, because it won't help, it won't be useful in the piece of writing, because we recommend that we are after objectivity and we have to propagate objectivity, not bias. Okay, so having known the several criteria of the CRAAP test and identified the purpose of each criterion, now let's move on to certain activities that help us teach our students to evaluate and sift information based on the CRAAP test in the classroom. Here I bring just examples of activities to include some criteria. And you can think of other activities or similar activities to teach your students the other criteria as well. So the first activity here focuses on teaching currency, and it's basically a categorization activity. So for this activity, you bring several news cutouts from a variety of sources, say blogs, Wikipedia, books, websites, and so on. And then you divide your class into groups and provide each group with a chart with the categories old, updated, and the clue, which leads you to your decision. After the students have completed their charts, members of each group discuss their choices. And here is an example of the chart that you can apply and use in your classroom. Moving on to the second activity, and the purpose of this activity is to teach relevance. Okay, and the activity is pick the odd one out. For this activity, you bring 4 to 5 paragraphs, and you can increase the number of the paragraphs depending on the number of your students and the size of your classroom. And you need to make sure that those paragraphs include examples of irrelevant statements. And if you don't find those paragraphs, you can write them yourself. Afterwards, you need to post those paragraphs on separate positions on a wall in the classroom. Then students take turns reading each paragraph and noting down the statements they think are irrelevant. After that, students group in a big circle to share their choices and the reasons behind those choices. And finally, you ask concept checking questions and provide feedback. Okay, and this brings us to activity number 3, which is Who Am I cards. And the purpose of this activity is to teach students the authority criterion. First, you provide students with 4 to 5 cutouts taken from several sources, blogs, journals, newspapers, books, and so on. And then you divide the students into groups so that each group receives a set of Who Am I cards corresponding to the number of the news cutouts. After this step, students have to check each source and write notes about it. Who the author is, whether the author is an expert, an ordinary person, and what the source is, whether a newspaper, etc. Once they're done with that step, each 2 groups merge together to discuss their choices. And the purpose here is to let students share as many ideas as they can and see how different members perceive things and reflect on information and the sources of information. And finally, you ask questions to check information with the whole class. Okay, so this brings us to the end of this session. And to recap, I just went through the use of the CRAAP test in helping students sift and evaluate the correctness of information in the English classroom, and to help them evaluate that information, whether they bring information from outside sources to be integrated in their writing assignments or to be used in their speaking assignments. And my focus was on the writing assignments. Thank you.